So we are in part, I would call B of the module that we were just discussing. And this one is the section that's dedicated to productivity and ROI, return on investment. Now, we realize, of course, that we all need to put into perspective the return on investments as we talk to clients and project teams or whatever industry professionals and colleagues that we're addressing about indoor air quality and the investments that they're potentially about to make in the solutions that would help create better indoor air quality. And up until recently, this has been a little bit of a tricky conversation to have because although common sense tells us that improving indoor air quality will yield better indoor environments and making us feel better as a result, which would then increase and help our performance, trying to prove this has been very difficult in the past. We were basically asking people to have confidence in what is actually the invisible. Poor indoor air quality cannot be seen. Typically, you can't smell it, at least hopefully not. And the nose is a very terrible indicator of air quality anyways, not reliable. But you can't meter it the way that you do energy or water consumption. Up until recently, we've not had real ways of doing that. And then further, the health hazards attributed to air quality were only just starting to kind of raise their heads and be questioned. Well, the landscape around air quality knowledge has taken a giant leap forward. Starting with this seminal study called the Cognitive Function Study, which was a controlled exposure study of green, and again, I'm using air quotes, green buildings versus conventional office environments. And this was published in 2015. And it was a collaborative effort with experts from Harvard T. Chan School of Public Health, SUNY Upstate Medical, and Syracuse University Center of Excellence. And the study was using 24 participants, as the slide is showing. It's a lot of information here, spending 6 full workdays in a controlled space. And this was a blind condition, triple blind, if I'm not mistaken. And on different days, they were exposed to indoor environmental quality conditions representing 3 different office types. The first being what was called a conventional or a typical office space, where the VOC levels and exposures and outdoor air levels and circulation, CFM, was what you find in a conventional building that has not had any kind of efforts towards a green building standard or anything that would point to efforts to make the indoor environmental conditions better. The second type was where they reduced the VOC levels to approximately 50 micrograms per cubic meter and 20 CFM outdoor and air per person. And then they had a third scenario, which is green plus building space, which meant that it had enhanced ventilation. So the VOC levels were reduced to approximately 50 and less. They had 40 CFM outdoor air per person. It was a much more aggressive take on what you conventionally think of. And you can read more about this report. I've left the links here. You can read about this. The websites are really helpful. But this was the idea where you're actually being very aggressive, where you're having low VOCs, high ventilation, and you're hopefully increasing what would be called a healthy indoor environment. And the results were really provocative. On average, the cognitive scores of the participants were 61% higher on the green building days. And you see that indicated here with this light green. This is what they're calling the green. And I suppose you could compare this to maybe some of the conventional certification programs, green buildings programs. And then it was 101% higher on the 2 days where they simulated a green plus building, and that's indicated with this dark green. So that's the enhanced green building compared to the conventional building, which is represented in brown. So the conclusion that was made was that the cog function scores were significantly better in the green building plus conditions compared to the conventional building across 9 different functional domains. And so the COG domains are across the bottom, and you can see that they're an array of different tests, everything from your information usage abilities, your crisis response, task orientation, strategy, things that I think most of us think are very significant during our day-to-day activities. We'd like to think clearly, and we'd like to have good indoor air quality to help us do that. And we know, of course, from the previous modules that the biggest cost for any company is its staff, the people, the wages and the insurance, the salaries. This overall cost is far greater than any fees associated with the rent or building operations. We discussed that previously. And according to the cognitive function study, this would double the quality of air and double the productivity level. So, you can really start to do some calculations with this now. You've got leverage and the associated productivity benefits when it comes to providing spaces with healthy indoor air quality. It's estimated to average about $6,500 per person per year. If you can get that extra productivity out of them, that's the price tag that's attached to it. And again, this is in US dollars, but you can convert it into whatever currency makes most sense for you. And in many cases, for many companies, the ROI is therefore met on the first day, because that's a lot of money saved just with a couple of hours of extra productivity. And even if you don't believe the really phenomenal numbers that came from the Harvard study, which I understand for a lot of people are pretty staggering, 101% increase in productivity, that's hard to wrap your head around it. But even if you actually reduce that to numbers that you think are applicable for your situation or are palatable, let's say, it comes as no surprise then that companies both large and small are taking note of this, because for the first time, we have credible information from a very highly respected institution that can be leveraged. So again, maybe you don't buy the 101%, but what if you just took a small percent? What about even just 10% increase? Well, this figure can be calculated as well, and it still will show substantial worth. And the case in point with one of our case studies, a 10% increase in productivity, which was, it's about 48 minutes, just barely an hour of extra productivity per day, was equal to what the firm paid in rent. So that translates in a huge win for them. And extra productivity just paid for their rent. And you can start crunching these numbers in terms of what is relevant to your situation and look at potential payback and these opportunities that are now afforded to you. This is a much more compelling conversation to start to have and engage with your clients. You can use more conservative numbers than what the Harvard study used, and you can still have some metrics that are worth contemplating. So for example, a payback, staff salary plus benefits times this sensitivity percentage, you can still look at what that payback would be. There's also a really important piece about gathering information from your employees using employee satisfaction surveys. I know that a lot of green building programs require this step in their certification process, and many employers are just voluntarily surveying their staff. So displayed here is the feedback from the case study that we were working with from their staff when they were asked to review the existing office conditions versus the new office conditions. And the question of note here that's kind of highlighted in red is the answer to the topical question, overall, does the air quality in your workspace enhance or interfere with your ability to get your job done? And mostly enhances was a miserable 7.3% score for the firm's old space versus 44.8% score for the newly renovated space. That is a big jump in employee satisfaction. And yes, this is an informal survey. It's not of the caliber of a Harvard study by any means, but the increase is still really noteworthy because it starts to beg the question, what is the cost to your company every time somebody is sick or they leave altogether and you need to hire new talent to fill that space? And so while I think that those particular instances are really obvious, that employers have reasons to improve indoor air quality, it should also be noted and recognized that building owners and landlords have reasons to be proactive in leading the market as well. This white paper was published in 2015 by JLL, and it was, again, a collaborative effort. And it's entitled Every Breath We Take. Again, I've put some source information down at the bottom for you. You can look this up if you would like to. But among the myriad topics that were covered was this one of note, addressing how investments in indoor air quality could help building owners differentiate themselves and their properties from their competitors. And as a result, of course, enable them to retain value in any market. And if you know anything about real estate markets, they can be very volatile and extremely competitive. So corroborating this idea were the results that are shown here. In 2013, in a Beijing tenant survey by BOMA China, which shows that health and safety were overwhelmingly prioritized as being the most important criteria for building satisfaction. And again, this is pointing to the trend for healthier buildings in a highly competitive world of real estate and leasing. And then we can show some really extreme ROI scenarios as well. And take this, for example, on red alert days in China, meaning days where the air pollution exceeded recommended healthy limits, the Canadian embassy must pay their staff to take the day off. So you can imagine, I mean, that is a massive hit to their staff and their productivity. That single day represents, in US dollars, 74,000, more than 74,000. And that's just in one day. That's 500,000 renminbi. And this scenario, providing employees with a healthy work environment, can have an ROI of just one day. You imagine it being able to reverse that so that you provide a healthy and safe environment so that people don't have to miss work. And it's not requisite for them to actually take a day off. But ROI, I really want to enunciate through this section that ROI is not just about the money. It takes many more forms. So in addition to the cognitive function study that Harvard conducted that I was mentioning before, Harvard has conducted a number of follow-up studies, all of which you can find on the Cog Function website. But I want to take a moment to show results from this particular study that was done with Harvard School of Public Health and Boston HUD Healthy Homes in conjunction with their Health in Places initiative in 2015. And this study was unique because it was not simulated, but rather a real-world application where half of a housing development implemented green building standards and half of the development remained as they were with no improvements. And the renovations included what you see here: improved filtration and ventilation to reduce respirable particles, reduced mold and moisture, selection of better materials, reducing chemical exposure in VOCs. And then they also had some behavioral education and training as well, informing people of how to use ventilation fans properly during cooking, so on and so forth. And the results, again, were notable. If you look at the reduction here, it's 76% reduction in asthma-related hospital visits, 71% decrease in absenteeism from school, 52% decrease asthma-related symptoms, and 47% reduction in overall sick building syndrome symptoms. So again, we have more studies from very reputable organizations to lean on to help us with building the case for putting money into solutions for better indoor air quality. And it's not just that kind of data coming back demonstrating how poor air quality is affecting productivity and absenteeism, but it's contributing to higher absenteeism in schools and adversely affecting their test scores as well. So this starts to really open the larger concern about air quality and social justice, because we need to start looking at the air quality in schools that are disadvantaged schools, perhaps, or fence line communities where they don't perhaps have a lot of funding to go towards renovations or upkeep, versus schools that happen to have a lot of funding or happen to be built recently and have better HVAC systems, better materials. Overall, this starts to raise the bigger question of how do we make sure that everybody, no matter where you are, where you live, has access to really superior indoor air quality? And then how do we get the information to leverage and prove that? That's of course where Reset comes in. And I want to take a moment. This is I think, really important for all of us, but particularly speaking to those of us who happen in our career to be living in places where we have really, I would say, better quality air. I want to address the critical point that air pollution, both outdoor and indoor, is not just a China or India or third world country problem. The WHO Global Ambient Air Quality Database published findings in their study. This is just released in May of 2018. And the study is an analysis of what the WHO says is the world's most comprehensive database on ambient air pollution. And it's collected from over 4,000 different cities and 108 countries. And just this May, the report showed that more than 80% of people living in urban areas are exposed to air quality levels that exceed the WHO's limits. And of course, again, to my point earlier, while all regions of the world are affected, populations in low-income cities are very much the most impacted. However, I know that most of us kind of think that when we hear of air quality problems and issues, smog, that kind of thing, we think of places like Beijing and Delhi. And that's not completely unfounded. Beijing and Delhi often make the headlines. But as this data shows, urban air is unsafe almost everywhere. The WHO estimates that 9 in 10 people worldwide are breathing highly polluted air. And in the European Union, 8 out of 10 cities, with data showing here exceeding the WHO's recommended guidelines. So I've said it before and I'll say it again, that this is not just a China problem. In fact, if you look just not too long ago, in my own backyard here in the Pacific Northwest, and cropping up in the most unsuspecting of places, this is a photo that I took after departing Shanghai, where in Shanghai I had left a beautiful, rare blue sky day. And this is what I was greeted with when I landed at SeaTac Airport. I was absolutely stunned. I mean, my worlds at that point had sort of swapped places, and I was confronted with the very real truth that our world is changing. And if you look at the hazard conditions 455, this level is what in China we would call, and we're calling, an air apocalypse. And this is in, areas in the Pacific Northwest, just outside of Montana. And that was the condition in Seattle, which is located here, that far away, because of wildfires. And then to further this, of course, just 2 months later, I snapped this photo of the air quality map that was showing California and parts of Nevada, where, again, wildfires were causing high levels of PM and ozone. And you see those areas in purple that are reaching the very hazardous range as a result of wildfires. And I want to point out that this is not the air quality index of just a soup of pollutants. This is looking at PM and ozone specifically. So we can't just have that knee-jerk reaction thinking that this is a problem that is only facing those who are in disadvantaged areas of the world or pre-industrial areas. And as a result, we saw headlines like this from Governor Jerry Brown: year-round blazes set to be the new normal, with climate change to blame. And less than 9 months later, now, as I record this on July 12th, 2018, there are 55 large wildfires burning in the central and western United States. And one of the fires is burning so fiercely in northern Nevada that NASA has reported that the smoke can be seen by orbiting satellites. So again, it might not be the same conditions that are causing our issues of outdoor pollution, but it is certainly arriving us at the same point where we no longer have the luxury of opening our windows and opening the dampers to let fresh air, i.e. outdoor air, in. And I want to have everybody kind of take a moment to look at a report called State of the Air by the American Lung Association. They release these every year. And it's just recently been published again for 2018, showing information that was collected from 2017 that says that more than 1 in 10 people in the United States live in an area with too many days with unhealthy levels of particulate pollution. And over 7 million people live in counties with unhealthful levels for all three pollutants: ozone, short-term and long-term particle pollution. And what's really compelling and important about this report is how there's a lot of missing data. So again, I think about this ROI of not just looking at productivity, but how can you contribute? When you actually start to gather information and data, you're helping to fill some of these data gaps. Two heavily populated counties in California, San Bernardino County and Los Angeles, lacked year-round particle pollution data. And the report says, had data been available for these two counties, which have historically been very high for all three pollutants, the actual number for this would probably be much higher. And furthermore, valid data remains missing on particle pollution in all of Illinois, which has been the case since 2014. That means that a lot of those cities, large cities, including Chicago and St. Louis, have not known how much particle matter they're breathing for 4 years. And now there's data missing from Mississippi and large counties in California, as I mentioned before. So I think that this lack of intelligence in data is something that we all need to kind of be aware of and sit up in our chairs a little bit and kind of say, I'm not sure what we can do, but we certainly need to put it on our radar, that we need to start collecting better data so that we know how to deal with it. And then, of course, the report is revealing how climate change is making it much harder for us to protect human health. The increased air quality problems reflected in this report are due in large part because 2016 was the second warmest year in U.S. history. And cities were suffering increased levels of ozone as a result of high temperatures and particle pollution that were stemming from these wildfires. And what's really important to note is that the historic wildfires of 2017 were not captured in this report. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the report is affected in 2019 when it comes out. So as climate change continues, cleaning up these pollutants is going to be ever more challenging. And the effects can continually be seen around the world. Globally, we have a problem. Another example here takes us to London. While air pollution has obviously decreased substantially since the epic smog problems that they had in the 1950s, it still accounts for 8% of all deaths. And exposure to high levels of PM 2.5 are linked to a very specific type of heart disease, ischemic, where it's basically where your heart suffocates. And in London, 15 out of 100 deaths were attributed to this particular disease. And I don't have to point out that, of course, in cities like Beijing, it's higher. 27 out of 100 deaths are due to PM-related heart disease. So I want to step back just a second and maybe, hopefully, take a little bit more of an optimistic stance. And to do that, I have to do something first that doesn't seem very optimistic. I have to talk about how Berkeley Earth was able to research and map air pollution concentrations and sources in China in 2015. So stay with me here for a moment. Collected throughout 2014, April through August of 2015, they had real-time monitoring stations distributed all throughout China and in some other countries as well, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong. And of these networks, they collected data that helped them to calculate and use the World Health Organization's Global Burden of Disease Framework model. And this is what they use to integrate exposure response function to consider risk of death over 5 different disease classes. So just think about it as a calculation for mortality. It's estimated based upon the information that they got for these pollution concentrations. And what they found, of course, is by exposure to particulate, 4,000 people were dying every day. That's 17% of the country's mortality rate. Now, I know that sounds, where's the optimism in that? Well, what if we took that information? What if we took that knowledge and we reversed it? How about instead of using the morbidity rate or the mortality rate because of how much particulate you're exposed to, what if we talked about how much you can protect yourself from it? So Giga, in collaboration with several innovative forward-thinking firms that deployed filtration systems to improve and protect building occupants and monitored the data for the indoor PM levels as compared to outdoor levels. In other words, the delta between those two numbers, they came up with what we call a protection factor. You're protecting your occupants. So using that same logic as the World Health Organization overlay for morbidity, but reversing it into a positive perspective, the impact of protecting people from PM 2.5 exposure led to some shocking results. So here, as you can see, the participating companies were actually able to record, and in this particular case, as many as 6.3 days of life gained. So life gained by being in these improved environments versus exposed to outdoor particulate levels that were hazardous. And this is huge. To offer a protection factor to your employees or your tenants, this is a surefire way to attract the best talent and keep your employees to ensure that you can actually talk about leasing your space for a green premium, as some people like to call it, or rather just to prove that you're better than your competition. Having this protection factor is also a very much more palatable way of talking about air quality. I think I would like to see more people talk about it in this sense. And there's more and more conversations around this idea where if you're able to show that your work environment is healthier, insurance premiums can go down. And I think for most of us in North America, this is a very hot topic. And I don't know exactly where all of this is going to lead, but certainly having a conversation about health as related to your work environment is very much on the forefront of most people's minds. So again, what if we could make all of our indoor spaces as safe as possible? That we had good data and we could react and we could respond. We can save energy and improve productivity. And we could increase attention spans and reaction times. And we could enable people to think more creatively and help kids increase their test scores and just do better. And overall, what if we could start talking about saving lives? And I think, to me, as smart professionals and experts, I know we have the wherewithal to accomplish this. And collectively, our efforts can catapult us towards having long-lasting beneficial effects. It's very easy to let ourselves become overwhelmed by the naysayers and get bogged down by the grim reports that we are seeing every day. But I absolutely believe that as architects, designers, engineers, builders, owners, citizen scientists, and just overall intelligent people of the world, we have the ability to set this straight. I'm putting my money on the trailblazers and fearless innovators who are willing to push ahead. And of course, that means you. And pushing ahead for you means going forth and taking the next step towards becoming a Reset Air AP. Passing your online written exam is going to test your familiarity and the comprehension of what you just listened to and what was covered in all of these webinar modules. So I hope you were taking some good notes. And the next part is taking the practical exam, which is completed in person and administered by a Reset trained professional. The on-site exam includes a 2-hour learning intensive that covers the standards thoroughly. And then afterwards, you'll have the 2 hours to take the exam. And during that 2 hours, it'll cover both core and shell and CI projects. And you need to apply the Reset Air standards to both. So we are currently creating the practicum calendar now, and I'm excited to say that our first will take place in October of 2018 in Pittsburgh at the David Lawrence Convention Center. But please, of course, look for more information and exam dates posted on the reset.build website. And if you would like to have a Reset Air exam scheduled in your city, be sure to let us know by emailing the Reset Air team. And you can do that here at any of these different info@reset.build, of course, and check out all the information on our website any chance that you have to actually contribute, we welcome your input. And with that, I'd really like to again say thank you so much for your interest in Reset Air, and I congratulate you on completing all the requisite webinar modules. I wish you the best of luck with your practical exam and look forward to seeing your profile added to the Reset Air accredited professional community. So with that, good luck.